Look, we made it through Exquisite Corpse, okay? A little mucus at this point. Yeah. Who's even counting?
The Weave World one, we talked about Mama Puss and everything, so I think, it's the least gross thing that we've discussed. There is some grotesquery tonight, not quite as profound, I think, as most of the other subjects, but there is a little bit tonight.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny. I finally made some time today to look through some YouTube recordings just to get my kind of head in and remind myself of some of the details of what we're going to be talking about. And yeah, man, it's.
You've been watching some Let's Plays of Half-Life.
I found a couple. The one that I really appreciated, there's someone who's done a speed record. They've actually completed the game in 20 minutes.
The speed players, man, it's insane.
Yeah, it is. It's completely
the tricks that they find to break the games with. It's absolutely crazy. Yeah. I can understand them doing it with things like 16-bit games, like with Sonic and stuff like that. It's kind of fun and easy to do it with those games, but stuff like Half-Life and Bloodborne, I don't know how you do it. It hurts. It must hurt to do that.
Well, I saw the thing that said Half-Life in 20 minutes, and I assumed it would be cut together. I assumed it was an editing trick, and then afterwards it runs the credits, and you're like, wait, that was a real thing I just saw.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how that's even possible.
It's particularly impressive because with Half-Life, although the vast majority of it you do have freedom of movement, there are some cutscenes. Effectively, they're not cutscenes, but there are areas where you are stuck. Like you can't. Yeah. Like especially, actually, funnily enough, in the first sort of 5 minutes or so, once you're in the test chamber.
Opening, of course. I mean, the opening takes forever to get moving. It's actually one of the great video game openings, insofar as I'm concerned. It's stunningly beautiful, but it is a long opening.
Well, I tell you, one of my memories of one of my really strong memories of this game was at some point. So I remember loading it up, and there's a very long kind of opening credits, isn't there, where you're going through this incredible cavernous environment.
Oh, it is absolutely amazing. I'd never seen anything like that in a video game before.
But the moment that really excited me in that sequence, so I remember looking at this thing that was incredible, and I think my hand must have nudged the mouse and the view moved, and I realised that it was live.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that makes Half-Life really special. Yeah. I mean, it sounds so weird to say it now, because of course it's de rigueur now, it's just part of video gaming now, but at the time, to have these storytelling moments where it was in-game engine, where you were in control still, and there was story being fed to you ambiently, rather than like in a cutscene or something, was really unusual.
Absolutely. No, it was just an incredible moment. And just what I loved about that was the feeling of agency, right? Like it's the opening credits of the game, but already I can move. I can choose what I'm looking at. And it's funny because this is kind of one of the big themes I wanted to talk about with this game. It is the illusion of agency, because what's hilarious about Half-Life is, like every other first-person shooter in the world, it's a corridor.
Totally it is. But it's very good at creating the illusion that it's not.
It never feels like one. It never feels like
one. No, it's very clever. I mean, it's one of the more revolutionary and more subtle things about Half-Life, actually. The fact that the storytelling is so ambient, it's so clever. Most of it's environmental. You either engage with it or you don't. Yeah. It's up to you. It doesn't force you to engage with it, which a lot of video games at the time did. I mean, the structure for storytelling in most video games of that era was you had the bits of gameplay, and then you had a cutscene, then you had the bits of gameplay, and then you had a cutscene. And the cutscenes were often FMV. They were often very different from the in-game engine because of technical limitations, And also, even stuff like the rules of the world were often different in cutscenes. I mean, I always think of JRPGs, like, in JRPGs, when a character dies in the story, it's a momentous event. They die and it's tragic and so on and so forth. But in game, you die all the time, and you just chuck a rejuvenation item or a healing spell at them, and they get back up. So there's this distinction between the story and the game itself, whereas Half-Life was this revolutionary thing that intermingled the story and the game together.
Yeah, that's I think you put your finger on it there, and it is really interesting because it's just like it kind of couldn't have been possible before Half-Life because the game engines just weren't good enough.
They weren't good enough. That's absolutely true. Part of it was technical limitation.
Yeah.
Storytelling in video games was really hard for a long time, and technically, I suppose it still is very hard. But it's not. What I love about Half-Life is that it didn't just overcome the problems regarding storytelling in video games. It revolutionized them.
Yeah, and you're right, it set a standard, didn't it? That's the thing about it that's so interesting. Like, there's still, frankly, there's still first-person shooters that don't live up to that standard of storytelling.
You are absolutely correct. There are. There most certainly are. Half-Life does this amazing thing, and it's something. It has these lessons that still haven't been picked up yet. It's incredible that to this day, and Half-Life is how many years old now? It was in 1990. What was it? 1998.
I believe so. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, 98 or 99.
My God, that's amazing
No, it's
to
astonishing.
think. That is amazing to think, because it's still okay. It looks dated now. It looks phenomenally dated now, but it still has these incredible elements with regards to its storytelling, its pacing, the ethos, the environments, the way it tells story environmentally. I think is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Like every sequence is its own little self-contained moment, its own little self-contained story, but which also moves the entire narrative along. Very clever stuff. Are you just out of interest? You are recording, yeah?
Absolutely.
Good. So am I, because just in case. I thought I'd just double check, because this is all brilliant stuff,
No, I'm rolling.
But I find, like, I was thinking about it earlier. How do you approach something like Half-Life? Because it's one of those weird things that it's like an echo now. It's even to this point, it's become almost like an internet meme or an internet joke. When is Half-Life 3 coming up?
Right.
But to try and explain to people who weren't around at the time, who maybe were too young to be involved in the phenomena or to appreciate it, Half-Life was epoch-making.
Absolutely. Well, here's the thing I was thinking about. So we discussed this before when we were talking about Binding of Isaac, how our generation is unique when it comes to gaming. There will never be a generation where not only did we grow up with computers, but computers grew up with us, right? We have that crucial relationship. When you and I were children, our computers produced, frankly, childish video games, not for want of trying, but just through the limitations of the hardware. The hardware grew up with us, and the games grew up with us in parallel. And I was thinking about this because I remember playing Wolfenstein. So I got in on the ground floor with first-person shooters. I was playing Wolfenstein on a PC.
Absolutely,
And I played Doom, and I played a little bit of Quake, although I normally couldn't find a machine powerful enough to run Quake, was the problem. When that one came out, it was an absolute beast for the hardware.
Well, it was a beast, wasn't it? It was almost one of those games, Quake, that revolutionised the whole notion of the PC culture.
Yeah.
Where you have to upgrade your PC, you have to have a graphics accelerator card, otherwise it's not going to run.
That's absolutely right, yeah, and it was one of those where it was kind of, the game was slightly ahead of the tech curve when it came out as well, so it was like phenomenal. So, I have vivid memories of playing Quake and it just running like an absolute pig as soon as you had a couple of creatures on the screen, or, because it was trying to keep track of all the particles, and your processor was just like, I can't,
I love the way that the developers got around certain graphical limitations as well, just by making it bleak as hell. Yeah. So everything's brown and black, and there are shadows everywhere. Just to make the processing a little bit easier. It's very clever in that regard. It's very bloody
Absolutely.
clever.
But the interesting thing is, so that then it was actually, although it was heavily modified, they used the Quake engine for Half-Life. So it was based on that. So, and it's worth sort of remembering, I guess, for those who don't know the history. So the first-person shooter was Wolfenstein. That was ID Software, and ID created Doom, which was the next step up, Quake, which was the next step up. But Half-Life although they used the Quake engine, it wasn't ID. It was Valve.
Half-Life was really strange in that regard too, because there was, for the longest time, after Doom, ID just dominated everything, because Doom was the game that sold the PC as a platform.
Absolutely.
It just, people bought PCs just so they could play Doom.
And deservedly so. It was, again, you have to remember, for the time, it was absolutely revolutionary, that game.
Oh my god, I mean, not only in terms of the game, but the marketing of Doom. Like, the first chapter was free. I mean, that was brilliance. That was, and these were the very earliest days of the internet, like the very earliest days, so hardly anyone had it. So to do that, and then to release patches to update the game and whatnot was totally revolutionary. But for the longest time, what happened as a result of that was certain companies just completely dominated the PC gaming market, and ID was one of them. And I remember the lead up to Half-Life. I remember, like, the magazines talking about it, but not being that bothered. You know, it was kind of like, oh, this game is in development. It looks kind of interesting. This unknown company, Valve, had done a few little bits and pieces here and there, but nothing noteworthy. And then, when it hit, it dropped with the force of like 9 atom bombs.
Absolutely.
It completely blew everything wide. I remember reading the reviews, and at the time, it was getting the kinds of reviews that no other game ever got. It was getting like 98, 97%. It was getting near perfect scores, and the video game journalists could not talk about it enough. I remember because it must have been for about a decade after. That's what was the benchmark.
Yeah.
So you would get reviews, and they'd say, "Oh, well, it does Half-Life. It does things a bit like Half-Life, but it doesn't do them half as well."
No, it's true. It was a quantum leap forward, wasn't it? And it was, and interestingly, it was partly technological. But you're right that I think the key thing was the storytelling, and that's something that, for whatever reason, that ID couldn't capture in the same way.
It's an odd thing, isn't it? I mean, they tried their best with Doom, and there is a kind of story there, I suppose, but it's not. It's more of an atmosphere with Doom, isn't it? I mean, there's no real plot points or anything. The levels are arenas more than anything.
But the thing is, it's not the point of Doom. The point of Doom is I mean, because the point of Wolfenstein, there wasn't really a story to that either. It was just kill the Nazis. No. But the point of Doom is
shoot Nazis,
shoot demons, and there's lots of them, and some of them have got fireballs, and some of them can fly, and you get really cool guns. You get like 9 guns instead of 4, and it was great. I mean, I've never disparaged Doom. I've wasted.
At all. I love the first 2 Dooms. I think are absolutely phenomenal. To be honest, I like all of the Doom games.
I don't know how many hundreds of hours I spent running around happily blowing up demons, but it's a lot, and it was a good time, right? Yeah. But the thing about Half-Life was, and I think this is the reason that those games reviewers just lost their minds. It took every technological advance that had happened through Quake, built on them, so the graphics are even more impressive than they were in Quake. But it finally figured out how you do storytelling in a first-person environment.
Yeah, because up until that point, as you said, first-person games were not notable for their stories. No. They really weren't. Even first-person RPGs were not notable for their stories. Things like Ultima Underworld, for example. It's not really a narrative-driven game. It is first-person, but it's not really a narrative-driven game. It's more of like a task-driven game, you know? Whereas Half-Life has a genuine plot. Like a genuine plot, and it's a 3-act structure, just like a film.
Very much so.
I mean, this is something that I find really interesting, actually. A lot of people said about Half-Life that it marks the point at which video games started sort of catching up with their cinematic influence, and I disagree to a certain degree. I think that, yes, you can definitely see cinematic influences in Half-Life. It wears them on its sleeve, actually, and it references so many different types of film, from war films to obviously science fiction, alien films and whatnot. But I would say that Half-Life marks the point at which video games start to come into their own as a storytelling medium, as an interactive medium. And in that regard, they actually start to distinguish themselves from cinema, because this is an environment where it's always active. There are 1 or 2 cutscenes. There are like very, very rare scripted events in Half-Life, but in almost all of them, you are still an active agent.
Well, that's the thing, and that's the genius of it. It's that moment in the credits where you move the mouse, or later on when you're in a conversation, the scientists are explaining what's going on, and then you realise, but I can just walk away from this guy while he's talking.
Yeah, and they'll react. Yes. That's what that was. I mean, okay, now looking at it, obviously their reactions and their AI is not as impressive as most of the games that are around now. But at the time, to have that kind of environment where characters would react to what you were doing was insane. I mean, early on, during that opening sequence, after the trainer's docked and you get into the Black Mesa compound, and you can go around to like the break rooms and the lunch rooms, and you can mess about with things. There's a microwave, and you can press the buttons on it, and the lunch inside will explode, and the security guard and the scientist nearby will go, "What are you doing?" And that was absolutely revolutionary.
It's really interesting as you say that. I'm reminded, like, there were hints of it in earlier games. There was some. I mean, it was incredibly prurient, but there were some things in Duke Nukem that had that.
Yeah.
I mean, you could use the urinals in Duke Nukem.
You could, I mean, Duke's kind of the midway point between like Doom and Half-Life in many respects, because it does have that. Okay, in Duke it's a completely different thing because it's designed to be prurient. The whole thing is designed to be prurient. But what it does have is an interactive environment, and it has a kind of story as sort of deliberately derivative and referential as it is. There is a story in Duke Nukem.
There is, and it was. I mean, it's really hard to explain now, but there was an incredible thrill when you played Nukem for the first time and you managed to, you blew a hole in the wall of the cinema.
Oh my god, that because just didn't
exactly because you knew you shoot the explosive barrel, the barrel explodes, but that's it. Walls do not move in first-person shooters, like they just don't.
Interactive environments where there are like multiple tiers. Also, Duke Nukem did that thing where you had multiple tiers on the environment, so you had like you could go upstairs and things, and there'd be like towers you could look down from. Which there's a little bit of that in Doom, but Doom never really handled multiple tiers well.
It didn't.
The engine just wasn't designed for it. Also in Duke, you had this thing where you had real environments. I mean, Doom always worked best when the environments were not real, when they were sort of science fiction, when they were in hell. In Doom 2, it tries to do Earth environments, like cities, and it doesn't really work. It doesn't really work. The engine isn't built for them. Seeing it in Duke was incredible. You actually do have city streets and urban environments and whatnot. And then in Half-Life, you have these incredibly domestic environments. You have these hallways where there are offices and where there are cleaning closets with supplies and things, and there are break rooms where you can use the vending machines. Black Mesa feels like, possibly for the first time ever, it doesn't feel like a video game environment.
No, that's exactly right. It doesn't feel. I mean, that's what we were saying about how it's the best corridor ever, because it doesn't ever feel like. I mean, ironically, there are quite a lot of corridors in the game, like real corridors in the game. But
actual corridors.
But that's the point, isn't it? It feels like a plausibly lived-in environment. That's the thing.
It does, and also the way it's structured.
Yeah.
I mean, up until this point, like first-person video games, the environments were designed to be game-like.
Yeah.
So there was no practicality to them. Like, you couldn't imagine real people wandering around these environments. Like the facilities in Doom, for example, were not designed for normal people to walk around.
They were designed to be challenging environments to shoot demons in. That's exactly. And they served that function very well. But you're right, they didn't feel real in any way. They were completely game environments. But this is
whereas
going for
Half-Life. After first of all, during the opening sequence, you get a real sense of what Black Mesa is like as a working environment, and that is brilliant. And after the event, when it's all gone to hell and everything's broken and there's stuff happening, you get these wonderful broken areas where there are like blocked corridors and there's bits of machinery that have come out of the walls and the ceiling, but it all feels real.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It feels like, someone has worked here. Someone used to operate in this space, and I love that. I can't remember seeing that ever before Half-Life.
No, and there's a couple of other things it does that I think are really interesting that kind of contribute to that feeling. And one of them is, we were talking about the steps and the evolution of gaming and the moment when gaming steps into its own. And I think one of the reasons people maybe got confused with the cinematic thing. Now, I think I'm right about this. I think Half-Life is the first time that you don't have a score in your first-person shooter.
You know what? You might be right.
I'm pretty sure, because you definitely had a score in Doom. You'd have one at the end of each level. Half-Life doesn't have levels. That's the other big thing.
No, it doesn't. It has chapters. It has chapters.
Because even Quake had levels. And again, that as soon as you have a level, you're back in video game mode, right?
Yes, you're back in video game land, aren't you? I mean, this is the thing. This is part of the subtler evolution that Half-Life represents, where the developers so want to tell you the story of this world and this setting, but they want to do it in a very specific way where they are not taking you out of it.
But it seems weird to talk about now, doesn't it? Because it seems so obvious now, but it must have been, at some point in Valve, someone must have had an absolute stand-up screaming row about the score. It must have been a gigantic deal to decide we're just not going to do it.
I'll bet there was, and I'll bet there was about a lot of things regarding Half-Life, because it is so revolutionary and so far beyond pretty much anything that went before it. It was a quantum leap. And it's like, the way I was thinking about it earlier is, can you imagine trying to explain to someone who maybe was too young in the 1980s or wasn't even born in the 1980s, like what Michael Jackson was like?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like,
you know, there is not an equivalent phenomena, is there?
Well, not, or even Prince. I mean, it's just not doable, is it? It's
not. There is not an equivalent phenomena because the status of pop music and of culture was so different back then. He was everywhere. He was like, you literally could not turn on the television or the radio and flick through a channel and not find something relating to him.
But yeah, I mean, he had a 3D cinema experience in Disneyland, for crying out loud.
Absolutely. Half-Life was like that.
Yeah, it was.
For video games, it was like that. And it did another thing as well, which was it legitimized the PC to the nth degree. It kick-started this whole cultural revolution where for a brief time, and again, this is hard to think about now, given that the PC is not even considered that serious a platform anymore. But for a brief time, the PC was where it was at after Half-Life.
It was the gaming platform of choice, absolutely. And I mean,
it's where all the revolutions occurred.
Yeah.
You know, all of the revolutions in video gaming started occurring on the PC and then filtering down to the consoles. I mean, after Half-Life, you have System Shock 2, which is phenomenal. After System Shock, you have Deus Ex, which is just completely changed. Again, another one of these revolutionary games that changes everything, and it just keeps cascading and cascading and cascading until you have the console wars reigniting, and you have the PlayStation 2 and so on and so forth, the original Xbox, and then it starts to slow down a little bit.
Even with the PS2, you know, like Grand Theft Auto 3 was a PC game that got ported down to the PS2. You know, like it. To think about that now. Yeah. In the current market, to think about that now, that Grand Theft Auto was originally a PC game that was ported to the consoles. Yeah, absolutely.
That's an insane thing to think about.
Well, I mean, you know, that's, I guess, actually, funny enough, if you wanted to explain to someone about cultural juggernauts of video game, GTA probably is your touchstone, actually. Modern. That's the modern equivalent, isn't it? That's the one that's just...
Yeah, I suppose it is, because it... Yeah, GTA, it's not even my taste of game, you know, it doesn't really do it for me, because I'm a bit myopic when it comes to video games. I like science fiction, and I like monsters, and I like magic, and I like occults and supernatural stuff, but there's no denying that GTA is exactly as you say, this insane juggernaut, and it seems that a lot of this stuff happened around that era. These incredible revolutions where you not only had quantum leaps in existing video gaming genres, you also had new genres cropping up.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, going back to the storytelling thing as well. I mean, one of the elements that watching these playthroughs reminded me of, and it's funny. It's one of the things that we were talking about before. You know, where we said there were some things that Half-Life did that still hasn't really been not only not improved on, not really built on, not referred to since. So in addition to not having a score, it's got an in-game reason for your heads-up display.
Yes. Oh my god. And not only that, it's minimal.
Oh, it's really minimalist. Yeah.
It's so minimalist, isn't it? And it's transparent. So it's not encroaching on the gaming space, you know. Giving the character a reason to have that heads-up display is nothing short of absolute genius. Because again, it's like, you can imagine, can't you? Someone somewhere in Valve, they were having this conversation. Look, we can't have a score. We can't have like an ammunition count. We can't have like a little menu with all the weapons. That's not the way it's going to work. Okay. Oh, if we do, we need to have a reason for it. And that is even now there are first-person shooters that don't do that.
That's right, exactly.
You know?
And it's the whole thing of him like crawling around, you know, like the idea that he goes to the entire story, you playing this guy, and you go through the entire story wearing this environment suit that you know what it looks like because you see it from the outside before you get into it, right? So you and that's clever too, because you're right, you never see yourself in the game. There aren't any reflective surfaces, but
not once.
But you kind of picture yourself in that suit all the same. Because you've seen it. I mean, it's so smart, man.
It is so incredibly clever, and the suit is clever on a number of levels as well, because of course you also have this problem certainly in first-person video games where your character is indestructible, despite just being human, and when they're thrown into these incredibly threatening and violent situations, and yet they come out of it fine. You know, they come out of it with just and you're like sort of that does take you out a little bit, but the environment suit really does provide some explanation for that, because it enhances everything, doesn't it? You know, it's protective, it enhances your musculature, it's a totally hostile environment suit, like a totally revolutionary one. And I love the fact that the guy they chuck into it is Gordon Freeman.
It's great. But it's even like down to the fact that they tell you like it's got a health enhancing thing, so if you plug it into the health sectors on the wall, then it will charge up through the suit, and it's got its own inbuilt electrical body armor that will provide you with extra protection from projectile. Like, it's all in fiction.
It's so clever. It's so bloody clever.
It really is.
But it never makes a muchness of it.
No, it doesn't make a big deal.
It never makes a muchness of it at all. You don't have to listen to the explanations of what the environment suit does. You could just walk away from the scientist who's telling you.
And the truth is, it functions like every other first-person shooter. You have a certain amount of health, and you have a certain amount of armor, and if you've got the armor, your health goes down slow when you get a shot. The mechanics are identical. But the genius was to say, we are going to create an in-game reason for every mechanic.
Yes. Yeah, it's not like, say, Duke Nukem, where it's just his natural machismo that gets him through, and it's not like the Doom guy because he's this incredible sort of genetically enhanced super soldier guy. It's Gordon Freeman is a scientist. He's a bit of a nerd, to be honest. You know. It's just this suit, really, that carries him through, and I love that. I absolutely love that. I mean, the whole setup of the resonance cascade is brilliant. Fantastic. It's totally. I mean, you know what's going to happen. Just the way. I mean, I love that. But the thing is, the game knows that you know.
That's right. It does. Yeah.
The game knows that you know, so you get these really kind of wry, funny little references. There's a bit at the beginning where if you do listen to one of the scientists who's peering at one of the panels, he's saying things like, no, it's fine, it's all well within parameters, and you're like, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's going to go wrong.
I think one of them says, I'm not sure I entirely approve, though I do admit the chances of something going seriously wrong are fairly low. And you're just like,
fairly low, yes. No, it's well within reasonable parameters. It's so funny. It's so funny. And I love the way, like, very early on, when the resonance cascade happens, and you get those flashes of what Zen looks like, the other reality where these aliens are coming from. Brilliant storytelling.
I mean, I remember the first time I played that, I remember actually getting really kind of frustrated in that opening sequence, because when you're trapped in the room and the sparks start flying, you can't do anything. You're running around in this little space, and if you get zapped, it hurts. And you're like, well, what? I can't. What am I supposed to do? You know?
Oh, the game never holds your hand. There's never there's never anything telling you, oh, you've got to go this way. Oh, you've got to go that way. There's none of those really hideous. And again, this is something a lot of video game franchises still haven't got.
No, that's right.
You don't have like an arrow telling you where to go.
The genius of Half-Life is what it does is every time is it just builds in natural barriers that fall out of the environment to stop you going back on yourself. I was watching, again, I was thinking about that as I was watching the playthrough today. There's a moment, for example, where you go through a tube and then you come out into this area and there are these crates hanging from wires, and you literally have to jump down from crate to crate to crate to crate to crate to get into another tunnel. And it's, by the way, like, I remember playing that and I remember just bricking it, because I actually have vertigo, and it was bad enough that it would get set off by first-person shooters. I had a similar problem with the Star Wars game Jedi Knight. That had a whole level set in a city. I think it was called Vertical City or Drop City or something like that. There's a whole level where you spend most of it walking around on ledges over sheer drops, and it killed me playing that. It was just like my teeth were on edge the whole time. And this was a very similar experience. But the clever thing is, so you do the jumps, you make it through, and what you don't notice is that the smart game designers now created a barrier behind you. You can't go back. Because you can't jump high enough to get back on the crate, so you can't get turned around.
So there's nothing that's going to break the rhythm or the forward impetus of the game.
That's right.
It's really clever, but at the same time, there's no barrier behind you. You know, it's not synthetically sealing it off. Right. It's part of the environment. Really clever
Super
stuff.
Smart. And they do that throughout. There's another wonderful moment later on where you're crawling through a tube and the tube just collapses and you fall out into a canteen and you smash the table and then you actually hurt yourself. Your health goes down and the suit tells you, fracture detected in right leg.
Yes. That is so. That's another thing I love from the hazmat suit, that you get these updates on Gordon's health.
It talks to you. It's so.
It actually talks to you. It's so warning, hazardous environment detected. That kind of. It's so cool.
As if the glowing green and the clicking of the Geiger counter weren't clue enough.
Yeah. It is so cool. I mean, it's been such a long time since I sat down and played it, but I do recall there was a period when I played it through, like, just the single-player game, just so many times. So, to the point whereby I was so familiar with this game. But it's still challenging. It's actually still really hard. Another thing Half-Life did, which I remember the video game mags going on and on and on about, was the AI.
Yep.
The enemy AI in Half-Life is actually still pretty damn good. It's not as revolutionary as it was, obviously, but it's still pretty damn good.
I think it stacks up. It stacks up pretty favourably up against something like Call of Duty to this day, actually.
Absolutely. When you come up against like the human enemies, the soldiers that are sent in to clean up the whole thing, they coordinate beautifully, and they use the environment around you. They work together. So, they do things like, if you chuck a grenade down the corridor and they notice it, they'll kick it back.
So 2 stories about this, because I remember when I was playing this game the first time, and I'd heard about the AI, and I remember getting through the first sort of whatever it is, quarter of the game, third of the game, thinking like, it's not all that, really. I mean...
Yeah, when you're just fighting the aliens
exactly. It's like the zombies just walk towards you, the head crabs... But, all right, they're annoying and they're freaky, but they're not actually. And then
they are freaky as
hell. We'll come back
hell,
to them.
And
then there's the dog things and the sparkly green and they're challenging, but I didn't think the AI was that great. And then I get to the bit with the human soldiers and they execute the scientists. You're like, oh, they're not here to rescue us.
They're not here to rescue you. Moment. They most definitely are not, no.
But there's 2 bits I really remember about that. The first one was, I remember there's a sequence where it actually kind of was like an arena space. I was up on a balcony and I remember I popped my head up from behind a crate, took a shot, ducked back down behind the crate, and then I heard this noise and I looked up and someone had chucked a grenade up. And I was just like, what? Like, that has never happened to me before in a video game. And then the second thing that happened later on in that sequence was there were a series of pillars, and there was a soldier at the back, and he was zigzagging between the pillars, using them for cover. And I was trying to pick him off each time he poked his head around. And then suddenly I was dead because his mate had snuck up behind me and shot me in the back of the head.
They are absolutely brilliant. The human enemies in Half-Life are absolutely amazing. They coordinate together and they make actual plans, and they are, in a way that no video game enemy ever was in any previous first-person shooter, aware of the environment.
I mean, I just remember being a little bit freaked out. I mean, genuinely just being like, that was
I found them really hard.
Man.
More than anything. Yeah, I found them really difficult to take down, especially when you've got loads of them later on. I mean, there are these massively cinematic sequences throughout Black Mesa, where certainly after the human enemies turn up. Like, there's one point where you have to cross a dam.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a wall.
Yeah.
It's a full... You actually emerge out... this is another thing Half-Life does, which is very rare. You emerge outside at various points. And you emerge from like being in this very claustrophobic subterranean environment. And you're outside on this massive dam, and you can see blue sky. There's military helicopters in the sky. There are towers. There are like military vehicles. And there's this alien enemy called a Gargantua, which is a gigantic model. I mean, absolutely huge. And the soldiers are coordinating, trying to take this thing down as it's kicking them off the dam, and it's sort of shoving vehicles onto them and crushing them. And you have to get through.
Yeah.
You have to get through where you are being attacked by both sides, but also both sides are also attacking one another.
And again, what's so amazing about that, and where it's revolutionary, is like, again, you'd have done that in a previous game at a cutscene, 100%.
Oh my god, yeah. I mean, you can even see how they would have done it, can't you? You can even see like him emerging into the light, and it would have been a FMV sequence. He'd have blinked, and there would have been lens flare, and that's how it would have happened.
But interestingly, I think even in modern games, a lot of times you do that with a cutscene.
A lot of the time they do. I mean,
keep the engine, because the engine's good enough now, but yeah.
Yeah. But cutscenes in and of themselves at this point, they should be very sparing, and they should really only ever be used when they are absolutely necessary. Because by and large, at this point in the evolution of video gaming, they aren't. And Half-Life gets away with it. In terms of like actual cut sequences where the game stops and you have to listen, or you have to watch something happen, there's about 1 or 2 in the entire game.
I think there's only one. I think the only time you have absolutely no control is when you get knocked out by the soldiers and you're being carried.
Yes,
I think that's
and you get chucked into the trash compactor.
Yeah, I think that's the only moment where you don't actually have control.
And actually, that's a really nice little moment, because it's totally by surprise. I mean, it took me I thought I'd done something wrong.
Yeah.
When I first got there, I was like, oh, shit, I'm dead. And it's just not the case, you've got to get out of the trash compactor. It's the Star Wars moment, isn't it, But that damn sequence sticks with me for some reason. Because I remember emerging out for the first time and seeing the utter carnage of it.
Well, it's the thing that got me about it was storytelling via engine. Actually, it was storytelling via AI, because the fight between the giant monster and the soldiers, that's all being handled by AI, and it's all interactive, so it will respond to the inputs you give it. So if you can find a way to sneak past it and let the soldiers keep fighting the thing, they'll keep fighting the thing.
Which is the best way to do it, by the way, because there are just too many of them. And not only that, but I noticed that the game, because it's happening in game engine, it's actually slightly randomized. So sometimes the Gargantua will win, sometimes the soldiers will win. It depends on how things turn out.
Yeah, but the important thing is the optimum strategy is to just kill whatever's left standing, right?
Exactly. Or just get through them, just find a way around them. And that's another thing Half-Life is really bloody good at, which would be exemplified later in Deus Ex.
Yes.
It is quite linear, Half-Life. It is very linear. It forces you down particular avenues. There's not really that much choice of path, but there are often multiple ways of tackling the linear path. So there are sometimes like you can go through an air vent, or you can go through directly through the corridors or whatever. There are often like slightly different ways of approaching each situation, and you do have to stop and think sometimes. Going in just blazing is not going to work.
No, often not. It's also added to the fact that you do get some incredibly groovy weaponry as the game continues, right?
Yeah, of course. And it has, there's certain weapons that I think you will just use as standard depending on your style of play. I always really liked the shotgun, I've got to say. I always really rather like the shotgun, but that's kind of the way I play first-person shooters.
Yeah, I got really into the trip mines.
The trip mines are brilliant.
I loved setting traps for the soldiers. That was one of my favourite things to do, because it was kind of turnabout, because I got hit by them a couple of times myself, and I was like, all right.
The bloody trip mines, when you don't know they're going to happen. And you when you first played the game and suddenly you are kibbles.
Yeah, that's right.
You are just bits,
Yeah. Well, there's another thing that happens like that. I was, again, watching the playthrough. It's the first time that you run into one of those kind of ceiling mouths.
Oh, the limpets. Yeah, the lamprey things. Bloody hell.
Because we haven't really talked about the alien design yet, but holy shit, the alien design.
Yeah, the alien design is absolutely fantastic. One of the things it looks like they've tried to do is to move away from how video games have traditionally designed aliens, because one of the big influences on video games in general was the Alien films.
Right.
And pretty much, if you look at, certainly in the 16-bit era, if you look at any alien design in video games, H.R. Giger is there.
Sure.
basically. HR Giga is there. Half-Life is completely different. It looks like they've tried to go with something slightly removed from that. They wanted their own style of thing that didn't look like the monsters from Doom, that didn't look like the monsters from Quake, that were their own entities. And not only are they stylistically interesting, but they suggest story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got, like, some of the earliest aliens you encounter are the slaves, which are those, they're the four-armed, sort of bug-eyed creatures that shoot lightning at you. If you look at them, they've got collars, they've got control collars on.
Yeah.
So they are an enslaved race. They're actually not fighting because they want to, they actually have to, which you find out, of course, when you play Half-Life 2, because they're friendly in Half-Life 2.
Yeah, right.
It's really bloody clever. You also have things, as we mentioned earlier, the head crabs.
Oh my god. Which is a kind
the
of...
head crabs...
I mean, they are an aliens shout-out in one respect, aren't they? Because
of course, they are the facehugger, aren't they? The facehugger. But slightly redesigned.
Yes.
They're slightly redesigned so that the head crabs are these wonderful parasitic aliens who are sort of like the first wave that the Zen aliens send through. And they're designed to sort of take over local life forms. So in and of themselves, they're not that threatening. They're these tiny, slightly cute, grotesque-looking little things that waddle along the floor. But what they do is they leap onto the heads of scientists and of security personnel, and they burrow through and they mutate them into these sort of clawed, sort of labial-mouthed zombie monsters, basically. There is an innate horror to the head crabs.
Definitely. No, and they're just...
And a lot of sort of horror sequences.
So icky, aren't they? Because they're eyeless. I mean, they're just smooth, white... And they bleed this kind of milky white, gooey kind of...
And when they die, they flip over and you can see, like, the apparatus by which they burrow... Like, they saw off the skull and they burrow through. It's really quite gross. And their life cycle is actually explored a lot more in Half-Life 2. But they do a lot here with them.
Absolutely.
They do an incredible amount with them. A lot of the scientists and the personnel are taken over by head crabs, and you get these entire environments that are just infested with the
Well, that's the
things.
thing, isn't it? Yeah, there's two bits that I remember, kind of viscerally, and the first one is, being in an air vent and turning the torch on, and just seeing these little fuckers skittering towards me, and just be like, oh hell no, like...
I seem to recall a sewer sequence as well, where they like get up from underneath the water, in a very sort of like zombie movie fashion.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Which is very clever. It's very clever, and also you get like, I mean, this was an unusual thing at the time as well. You actually get different models of head crab zombie based on what they've taken over.
Yeah, right.
So you get like the scientist ones are the most common, but you also get security guard personnel ones.
But there's another fantastic sequence that uses them really well, where you're going down in a lift, and the lift's at a 45-degree angle, and it's not an enclosed environment. It's a a platform lift, right?
Yep.
And then you hear the skittering noise, and you look up the 45-degree slope, and there's just this sea of them.
I remember that. Yes, it's a massive lift, isn't it? It's like a cargo lift that you have to activate, and it goes down forever.
That's right. It's a long,
really long, and they come pouring down over the top.
I
remember
of the
that.
way down, and then it's like, oh, you are kidding me.
Yeah, because actually, if I remember correctly, there is a really tough sequence before that.
Yeah.
So you're sort of like, you're going down this stuff, and you're, oh, thank God.
That's it.
You may have like no ammunition at that point. You may be in really dire straits, and then you get these bloody head crabs that are just pouring down on you.
And you stood there with your crowbar,
brilliant.
like, really?
Yeah. I mean, again, it's another thing that Half-Life does really well, this gradual introduction of the aliens, and it introduces them all not via cutscenes, but via set pieces that show you their character, that show you who they are. So you get the head crab zombies first, and then you get things like the slaves turning up later on, which tend to teleport in. And what's really cool about the slaves is if you stop and listen, you can hear them talking to one another.
Oh, that's interesting.
They communicate, and if you catch one unawares, they actually even have motions. They motion to one another, so when they're talking, they'll sort of get up and rear up and sort of put their heads back as they're hooting and talking to one another.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It's so cool. That stuff, I mean, that stuff's kind de rigueur now. You get that a lot in video games now. But back then, that was very unusual.
Well, it's about changing. It really is a quantum leap. It's about changing your perception of what the game is, like what it's about. You know, it's gone from scoring and therefore they all look the same and their job is to kill you, to every element of Half-Life is storytelling, like every element of it.
Yeah, it's like they've gone for every tiny little aspect just to squeeze the maximum amount of ethos out of it, you know? And it works beautifully, because it means that they don't have to belabor themselves. They've worked so hard on the ambient storytelling through design, through environment and whatnot, that they don't have to... There is hardly a moment in Half-Life where you have characters standing around talking about what's going to happen or what has happened. And even when it does happen, it's kind of oblique.
Yeah.
It's like they suggest. I mean, you get the G-Man, the briefcase guy, who's one of the best elements of Half-Life, I've got to say. He introduces a slightly surreal element to things. For those who don't know, the G-Man or the briefcase guy is this character who you originally see in the opening. You see him through windows, like talking to people. And he's this very tall, very gaunt guy who carries a briefcase all the time. And there is something very deeply mysterious about him. First of all, he survives the resonance cascade where hardly anyone else does, and he seems to survive it unscathed. And then he keeps turning up in the weirdest places.
I mean, he's almost like the smoker guy from X-Files, right? There's some of that vibe.
Yes. The X-Files influence in Half-Life is strong. It's definitely strong. What I love is when you see him like through windows where he can't possibly be, where you know you've just like flooded the area with toxic gas or something, or where you know you can't get into that room because there's been a collapse or because there are zombies or monsters in there, and he's there. And then when you get up there, he's gone. He's very mysterious. There is something slightly otherworldly about the G-Man. And you know what? It's never really explained where he comes from or what he's doing.
No, and it's great too because it's like, I mean, we've been using the word alien a lot. Actually, the interesting thing about the entities in Half-Life is they're interdimensional, right?
They are. They're slightly Lovecraftian in that regard.
And and that's what I think's really, and that plays into the design. There's stuff about it that is, it definitely, the Lovecraft influence is there. I mean, the most obvious sequence of that is where you are at one point in a room with 3 giant tentacles, right?
Oh yes, that's one of the first moments where I realised like the scale of some of the monsters you were going to face. Because I remember when you approach that area, you approach it through a vent.
That's right.
And you can hear this banging and this roaring. You're like, what the hell is that? And then you see it, and it's this. You get this set piece where it smashes through a window and it drags someone off in its sucker mouth. And you have to. It's actually based on movement, and you have to learn this because you have to sneak around the damn thing before you kill it.
You have to move
and if you don't,
really slowly. That's the trick.
And quietly. You need to walk, like, if you've got an area where there's steel grating, don't walk on it. Because it will make a noise and the thing will hear you, and it will kill you instantly. It just kills you instantly. And you have to maneuver your way around until you can activate this. I think it's like a sort of thruster that's at the top of the area, and it pelts down on the thing and just fries
it's sat in the well of a test firing for the rocket. So
that's right. It's just a brilliant set piece, and it changes the gameplay up enormously because suddenly you have this stealth element.
And like you say, the genius of it is there's no on-screen instruction. Move quietly to avoid detection. No, you just got to figure this shit out.
You've just got to figure it out.
And the game gives you a clue, right? Because what happens is the tentacles, so they end in hooks. They end in these gigantic hooks, and the banging noise is the hooks banging on the different floors of the circular chamber that you're in. So, you know, the game is telling you this creature is blind. You know, but it's up to you.
Just very subtly, very subtly.
It's up to you to put it together.
I imagine, like a lot. I mean, I know I did. A lot of people probably died a lot when they got to that sequence because they tried to run through, or they tried to kill it.
Yeah. I wasted an awful lot of ammunition before I worked out.
Yeah, you cannot kill it. It's immortal. You cannot kill the thing. But no, it's a good example of just how the game it changes every 2 seconds. there's some new dynamic introduced, often a new monster introduced that you have to learn how to tackle. When the Gargantua is first introduced, you do get this slightly gigantism reaction to it because you're in an enclosed space with it. You're in a parking lot when you first meet the Gargantua, and it's fighting with some of the soldiers. You get this wonderful moment where you've got two soldiers using a car as cover firing at it, and it pushes the car against them and squashes them against the wall, and then it turns to you. And you've got to figure out, do I run, do I fight it? And you can do both.
That's right.
You can actually do both.
No, it's really clever. And I mean, that's something that, again, we talked about before, that's something they developed even further in Deus Ex, right, where it got to the point where you'd have sequences, so you'd have sequences that were apparently ambient storytelling, but you could actually interact even in those moments, and you could change the course of events.
In Deus Ex, you can even do that. I mean, they take it. Deus Ex is another ridiculous quantum leap forward for storytelling in video games. And again, it does stuff that video games often don't these days. But you could do things in Deus Ex, like you'd actually interrupt the storytelling segments, and it would change the way the story came out.
Yeah, and in incredibly dramatic ways. I mean, that was a really incredible trick that it pulled. But the other thing you made me think there is we were talking about how Half-Life kind of taught you by just by setting the environment that you figure out. There's a very kind of you can feel the influence on the Dark Souls games, can't you?
Oh my god, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so weird to think, because of course the Dark Souls games are, in terms of subject and in terms of aesthetics, like completely removed from Half-Life. They're third-person games, they're sort of combat-oriented RPGs, they have this slightly fantasy element, but yes, you are absolutely right, in the sense that there's this minimal HUD that hardly exists at all. There's no direction, there's no arrow telling you where to go, there are no instructions whatsoever. It just leaves you to figure out how to operate in these environments, and you've just got to damn well learn. Half-Life is very like that.
And in particular in the way it forces you to interact with the enemies in the game, right? Like, you just have to figure them out. They have attack patterns, and they're tough, and some of them are incredibly tough, but they're all beatable.
They are beatable. I mean, sometimes when you come up against them, you feel that they're not.
Yes, that's often the
case. You often feel like, well, what am I doing wrong? How can I deal with this? Is there a trick? Is there a way around this? And often the game will give you the tools before you encounter them, and you've just got to figure it out. I mean, as you were talking about earlier, one of the best things you can do with the soldiers is learn the environment and start laying traps.
Yeah, right, absolutely.
That works very, very well indeed. It works very well with the aliens as well, because the aliens are slightly stupider than the military men, than the actual soldiers.
It may be false memory, but I seem to remember maybe at a certain point using a grenade with a tentacle monster as a distraction, like throwing a grenade to the other side of the room.
No, that works. Yeah, you can actually do that. You can do things like there are grenades you can use. I believe there are like exploding crates as well, and if you use them, then it turns. It's sort of like it flips around and turns that way. So yeah, there's lots of environmental stuff you can do. You can even do stuff like if you've got the crowbar, you can smash the wall, you can bang on the wall and enemies will hear it.
That's so great.
Yeah, it's really damn clever. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that games like System Shock 2, which came out like about a year after Half-Life, really picked up and ran with in a slightly different way. You know, Half-Life is a sort of action horror game, an action horror science fiction game, whereas System Shock is complete horror, like complete horror. And it used the elements of Half-Life, the techniques that Half-Life had revolutionized and made them even denser. But it's amazing to think that how influential Half-Life is. It's impossible now. It's very much like say Frankenstein in literature. It's impossible now, like to read a book in almost any genre without feeling the influence of Frankenstein. And in the same way, it's impossible to play a video game these days without feeling the influence of Half-Life.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think if you think about, like, you know, certainly in terms of, I mean, we've talked about the artificial intelligence. That's something that, and, you know, the ambient storytelling, I mean, that is something that GTA picked up and ran with, right? One of the great things about that, actually, one of my favourite things about all of the games in the GTA 3 on franchise is driving around in the car and just listening to the radio. And all
I mean, it's there's a degree of freedom, isn't there?
But it's also like the satire that's on the radio stations is genuinely brilliant. Like, they've got all these characters that are just twists on DJs that you've heard of, or, you know, stations.
And shock jocks and things like that.
There's one in GTA 4, there's a Howard Stern that just mercilessly rips the piss out of the Howard Stern thing, and it's brilliant. It's genuinely brilliant, you know. And here's Robin, the black woman that protects me from any accusations of racism, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And it's, you know, it's not subtle, but it is brilliant. And again, it just creates the sense of the environment you're in. The advertisements as well. That was the other thing I remember. In GTA 3, the advert for the Zaibatsu monstrosity. It's so big, you know, all this kind of stuff. Just glorious storytelling, you know, just. And
it's hard to believe, isn't it, that most of this sort of thing, the imperative began with Half-Life,
you trace
really.
it back there. And then I was thinking about, so obviously, you know, we talked about Dark Souls and that whole, you know, there's an influence there. The other game I was thinking about, very forcibly reminded of, having played it relatively recently, was Alien Isolation, which is interesting because it kind of brings it full circle. The Alien influence on Half-Life is there. I mean, it's considerable. Yep. But it's interesting
Certainly
how,
is.
and then Half-Life helped them create finally a truly brilliant Alien game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if nothing else, on the technical terms, there's so much that Half-Life coined, which is now just standard in first-person shooters. It is just standard because the controls were so good. Yeah, it was so fluid and so effortlessly playable, and they haven't changed a great deal. That control system has not changed a great deal since Half-Life. It's been refined slightly.
No, you're right.
But when you play Half-Life 1 and then you play the orange box, you play Half-Life 2. The interesting thing about Half-Life 2 is that obviously people were holding their breath when Half-Life 2, because how can you possibly follow Half-Life? How can you make something as epoch-making as Half-Life? And they actually did.
Yeah, it is a superb game. Interestingly, I can't quite put my finger on why. Even though it actually has more outdoors environments than Half-Life, it did feel just slightly more on rails to me than the original game.
It is actually more corridor-like. It's not quite as expansive as Half-Life 1 is for some reason. But I was amazed that they managed to do it again.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the storytelling's wonderful in that game. And
it's the fluidity of how it changes. Like, every chapter's different. And introduces new mechanics, and it has its own ethos. The big part of Half-Life 2 that completely sold me was, is it Ravenholm?
The town.
It's the horror sequence, basically.
Oh, right, yeah.
Where it just goes full on balls to the wall zombie horror.
Okay, yeah.
I loved that sequence. I loved it to bits, and I love it to bits still. I think it is still one of the best sequences in any first-person game ever.
Yeah, and the thing about, I mean, that was the other thing I was thinking about with Half-Life. I think the reason people got hung up on the whole, influence from cinema thing is because there are sequences in Half-Life that feel cinematic, but what's clever about it is, and what maybe they were struggling to articulate a bit, is it is cinematic, but it's like you're the hero in an action movie.
Absolutely, and also you're also the cameraman.
Right,
you know,
right.
You are also the living camera. You are directing in many respects this scene and how it pans out and what you see. It's interactive storytelling. It's using the beats and maybe some of the subjects of cinema and even some of the techniques of cinema. But this is the point at which you have agency.
Yes.
You know, that's the big difference between video games and any other medium.
Absolutely.
And it's what makes them very unique. It's what makes them, to a degree, in certain respects, respects kind of superior to more traditional mediums, because you have agency in how the stories come out, and you have an immersion in video games that you maybe don't have in more passive mediums.
Yeah, and I mean, the sequence I was particularly thinking about was, and I mean, the trappings are different, but so you're sat in a train, and functionally it's the minecart sequence from Temple of Doom, except you've got a gun and you can actually shoot the signs to move the points to get the train to go where you want it to go. Like,
the actual chapter's called On Rails, isn't it? It's really good. It's a really good sequence.
Oh god! But it's so, because that's the thing of, like, it's not. It's cinematic, but it's cinematic in the sense that you're in the movie. You're making the movie. It's not that you're watching a movie. You are an active participant.
You're there.
You are, and you get to do the Indiana Jones thing of shooting the signal and changing and that's just fantastic.
It is absolutely wonderful. I mean, a lot of people, one of the only bum beats of Half-Life, a lot of people find that it slips off in the third act. They don't really like the Zen stuff.
Interestingly, I've never finished the game.
Oh, so do you ever get to Zen?
I made it to Zen, and I couldn't beat the gigantic dangling gonad thing.
The Gonarch.
Couldn't do it.
Which is just a giant joke, isn't it? It's hilarious. The Gonarch is like, there aren't really bosses such, because it's not really that kind of game, but the Gonarch is about as close to a boss as you get, basically. And the Gonarch is essentially it's the head crab mother. You actually there is a point in the game in the third act where you're transported to the alien dimension, and it's really wacky. I mean, I get the impression that if they had the technological capacity, they'd have made it as surreal as hell, because it's as surreal as hell anyway. But a lot of people don't like it because it changes the gameplay style quite significantly. There's a lot of... The gravity is different, for one thing.
That's right, yeah. The physics on the gravity is different. You have to use the kind of super jump that you've not had that long in the game to get used to, and then they've changed the gravity, so it's difficult.
It's a big learning curve. It's a big learning curve. The environment is so strange that often it's difficult to find your way.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to judge distances as well, because the background's just so messed up.
And there's a lot of platforming.
There is, there is.
There's a lot of platforming, which in first-person shooters, certainly of that era, was not quite as refined. It was rather difficult to get right.
It was really I mean, like I say, there were a couple of sequences, and again, they did it in Jedi Knight, where you could do the walking along rails thing, and that would kind of work. But actual jumping around was a pretty dicey proposition.
Zen is weird. I mean, I quite like Zen for its aesthetics, and I like the change from, like, the sort of the office environment, the science fiction environment, and the industrial environments that you've had. It is really interesting, because you actually get to see where the aliens come from. You get to see, like, their factories and the odd sort of birthing pools where they birth certain soldier aliens and stuff like that. It really is fascinating. But Zen is bloody hard. And also the logic of the puzzles is different. It becomes much more puzzle-based and much more platform-based in Zen. And there are sequences that are just bloody weird.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't get past the difficulty curve. It was as simple as that. It wasn't...
Yeah, a lot of people couldn't. A lot of people couldn't. There's also, like, there's a lot of dead falls in Zen, where you just fall and you die. You fall forever and you die. It's the longest sequence in the game, just figuring out what to do.
Yeah. I've been waiting for
and there are also new aliens there.
Yeah,
there are some very nasty new aliens there, which are really difficult.
Tough as nails. I mean, that's the other thing I remember was just like, I haven't got enough ammunition for that. Like, I just
those flying things.
Yeah.
The psychic aliens that are sort of cross-legged and they fly around firing psychic bolts at you. Very damn hard. They are tough. They come out of nowhere. They take a lot of shots to kill, and their psychic blasts home in on you.
I mean, I think, taking a step back from how well they succeeded, you've got to admire the ambition, like the narrative ambition to just say, no, we're just going to go there. We're going to take you all the way.
Yeah. We're going to, like, change everything on you. We're actually going to take the game that they must have known was really successful. They must have known it was something special. And actually what we're going to do is we're going to change it completely.
Absolutely.
I mean, that shows a degree of confidence, I've got to say. And I do like the Zen levels, just for the aesthetic elements of them.
Absolutely.
It's just that if you don't know what you're doing, figuring them out is it can be just phenomenally hard.
Yeah, no, I just found them crushing. But I mean, again, I was impressed by the ambition, and also just I think the commitment to the narrative too, because it is kind of, if you think about it, it kind of would have been a cop out if you'd never got to go.
It would, wouldn't it? Because you actually do see the flashes of it. You actually temporarily go there early on when you first when the resonance cascade first happens. You see flashes of Zen.
Well, and also just really on a pure narrative level, the heroic journey dictates you have to go there.
Yeah, you've prepared for it, haven't you? You've got to go into the heart of darkness. You've got to go into Mordor. You've got to go into the darkness. Yeah, and you do. I mean, once you've got through Zen, you actually do come face to face with the architect of the invasion, a creature called Nyalanth. Who is this? It's an ode to 2001. It's a giant fetus-headed alien thing that you've got to defeat, and that's the sort of architect of it all. Yeah,
I caught that on one of the videos, so I did finally get to see what it looks like.
You actually got to see it.
God, that's absurd.
It is really kind of absurd, and when you kill it, it's actually hilarious because it kind of flies around like a punctured balloon. With all of this sort of portal energy coming out of it, and it explodes eventually. But it's really cool. The ending sequence is really downbeat.
Yeah.
It's really downbeat. It kind of sets off like an alternative history. So you get G-Man turning up, telling you, "Nicely done, Mr. Freeman." And what you see in the background is that the military have invaded Zen and have conquered it.
Right.
And suddenly you're on this interdimensional train with the G-Man, and you don't know where you're going.
Right.
You don't know what's going to happen, and that's where it ends.
It's really nice. I mean, I love there's a really kind of crunchy, enjoyable cynicism at work there, isn't there?
No, totally, and it's throughout the game.
Absolutely.
I mean, there is this like when the humans turn up, the military turns up, and you think, oh great, there's going to be some help, and they actually start gunning down the scientists, and you realise no, they're here to clean up.
That was a genuinely chilling moment the first time because I hadn't been spoiled, so I didn't know that was coming.
Ah, so you didn't know.
No.
It's a nasty moment.
It really was.
It is a genuinely nasty moment.
They gunned down one of the scientists in front of you, you're hiding, or I was anyway, maybe other people weren't, but I was sort of up and away from the action a little bit, but I saw them and I was like, great, and then they shoot the scientist and I was like, shit.
Yeah, and then of course you find out that they are the most tough enemies in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then you got to deal with the fact they've got actual AI and they know what they're doing. No, it was just a great. Again, it's the storytelling moment, and it's not. It's a long way from the most original twist in the world, but it's still.
Oh, of course not. I mean, it's kind of again, it's kind of showing its cinematic and literary influences, isn't it? Because it is the kind of beat that happens all the time in this kind of story. But I think the writers of the game were aware that people know of these beats, and they kind of lampoon them. They're very wry about it all. They know what their references are, and they know that their audience knows what their references are. I mean, the big baby thing at the end is 2001. It's a space odyssey, it's and the military thing. Well, name any kind of conspiracy theory, alien invasion story, and you'll get that coming up again and again and again. Where the military turn up and it looks like they're there to save people, and then they start killing people.
Yeah,
it happens all the time.
I mean, I think the biggest for me, the most obvious reference point is the kind of Ramiro, right? I mean, that was kind of a continual fascination of his, right? Was the kind of to what degree are the military evil and to what degree are they just incompetent, but there was certainly that undercurrent there, and it was. But I think the other thing that was clever about it, as I think about it, was up to that point, the game had trained you to trust NPCs because you could interact with them. If you went up to the scientists and you were hurt, they'd give you an injection to pick you up.
Yeah, that's right. I'd forgotten about that. Yes.
And there were some sequences where the security guards would fight with you, right? They'd come with you for a period of time and they'd help you shoot the head crabs and stuff. So.
And sometimes the scientists, if you escorted them, they could do things like turn on doors or, turn on the electricity in certain areas if you kept them alive.
Yeah, that's right. So like
very clever stuff.
So you've been trained to think. So when the soldiers turn up, you think, your first instinct is, okay, so I'm going to be fighting with the soldiers. Awesome.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, yes, you are,
no.
but not like that.
No, it's the game is designed to isolate you, isn't it? It's designed to make you alone against these incredible odds, and it is a slog of a game. I mean, it's a long ass game. It's at least, I mean, the single player mission. It's about. It's about 4 or 5 hours, isn't it?
Oh, comfortably. I mean, it took me a hell of a lot longer because I'm a very kind of naturally cautious player, so
it took me a lot longer than that too. And on top of that, of course, you then had the add-ons, which came out, and the mods. You had Opposing Force, which actually played. It's the same story, but from the perspective of one of the soldiers.
That's right. And then they did Blue Shift, didn't they? Which was one of the security.
Which
guards.
Is Barney. Yeah, Barney the security guard you play, which is quite brilliant. But on top of that, Half-Life followed in Doom's wake in the sense that one of the reasons Doom sustained for so long is because it was so moddable.
Yeah.
Half-Life had that built in, so you had the game code and also the tools for building the game in the game itself. Right. So the modding scene for Half-Life was insane.
Well, I mean that it spawned Team Fortress, right? Which is actually still being played to this day on Steam, right?
Team Fortress, yeah. I'm not really an online multiplayer kind of guy. I like my single player experiences, but I do recall playing Team Fortress Classic a lot and really bloody enjoying
it. Absolutely.
It's such a basic thing. It's just a military capture the flag game. But my God, is it fun?
Well, I mean, and obviously Half-Life 2 spawned Team Fortress 2, and that is still thriving. I mean, there are still
Team Fortress 2. They're still so good. That's the thing. They're so balanced. They're so easy to play. I mean, it's not the kind of environment I dip toe into anymore because I don't like the cultures surrounding them. Online, like competitive video gaming culture is not a healthy place to be right now.
No.
But the games themselves are beautiful.
Absolutely.
They're so elegant.
No, that's right.
So beautifully put. I always used to play a spy in the original Team Fortress Classic, which was like it was a very light class. It had no armor. If you were caught, you were dead, basically. But what you could do is disguise yourself as a member of the enemy team.
That's right. Yeah.
And if you could get behind someone and backstab them, they would die instantly.
That's right. It's still there in TF2, the spy.
Nothing more satisfying than that, I can tell you. Nothing more satisfying in all the world. My God, the kills I racked up as a spy doing that.
But what a legacy the game had. I mean, there was one other element of the storytelling I did want to touch on before we kind of, I sense we're getting towards wrapping up. But we haven't really talked about it, but it fits in with everything we've talked about in terms of the ambient storytelling, and it really very forcefully came back to me watching these YouTube videos with a surprising kind of. It was a surprising kind of. No, I'm alright. Surprising kind of.
You okay?
Yeah. A surprising kind of visceral reaction I had to it, which was the sound design. Is just stunning.
My God.
And we kind of hinted at it, right? Because we talked about the banging noise of the tentacles in the room and that. But it's little things like it's the sound that the suit makes as it's charging up.
It's the little scrabblings of like the head crabs and the little noises that they make that key you in to the fact that they're there. It's that sort of radio scrabbling you get from the soldiers that suggests that they've turned up. It's phenomenally clever. In fact, the sound design was absolutely revolutionary for Half-Life. There'd never been anything like it. You get things like echoes. In certain environments, bullets will ricochet off the walls and you'll hear the echoes and you'll actually see the ricochet. It just didn't happen. You didn't get that stuff. You get things like, if you walk on different surfaces, Gordon's boots make different sounds. And at certain points in the game, that's crucial. I mean, the soldiers can hear you as well. That's the other thing.
Yes. So,
they certainly can. They certainly can. All of the aliens have their own vocalizations and their own like lexicons of language that they use to one another, and they use sound differently. All of the aliens and the soldiers utilize sound in slightly different ways. It's phenomenal. And then you have the ambient noises, so you've always got something going on in Black Mesa. So you've got sparking electricity, you've got collapses occurring, you've got venting gas, you've got fires, all sorts of things going on, and also the music. You've got the soundtrack, which is also wonderful.
No, it's superb, and you know, little details. I mean, we did touch on it earlier, but like the Geiger counter that's built into the suit.
Yes,
that would just
to let you know, that the area is toxic.
It's just
bloody.
It's so
clever.
great. It just suddenly starts ticking, and you're like, oh shit.
You're like, oh,
because it's just another way to make you paranoid as a player, right? It's just another little kind of tool in the toolkit. They use
it just enhances tension, doesn't it? Wonderful. That's all it does. It's brilliantly clever, and it's like the people at Valve it's like they took every element in and of itself and just said, right, how can we ramp this up to 11?
Absolutely.
How can we make this the best it can possibly be, and put it together and make it all work? Make it all just this weird video game alchemy. And it did, and it is impossible to overemphasize how important this game was.
Absolutely. And I think it came from like a real earnest desire. I think, you know, we talked about it right at the start, but I think that's right. It was an earnest desire to create an environment that just felt like a real environment. It just felt like a place you were actually walking around in. It didn't feel like a video game level. It didn't feel like, you know, an arena or, you know, a puzzle to be solved.
No, this is a story, so it's a real place. We want to tell you the story of Black Mesa, and it is one of the all-time great video game environments.
Definitely.
Black Mesa, it is a wonderful place to be.
A wonderful hellscape.
Try
and survive through.
I mean, in that regard, it even has kind of a lineage to like the original Resident Evil, because Half-Life was just a little bit later on from the original Resident Evil, because of course that also the mansion also feels like a lived-in place. It feels like a real place, and that seems to be a thing during that period of video game design. We want environments that are not like Sonic the Hedgehog levels, that are not like Mario levels, where, you know, it doesn't really make sense in any real life setting. No, we want them to work. You know, we need to feel as though there was narrative occurring before we dropped in here.
I think that's a really good point. And I also think there's something about the fact that it happened on the PC, because again, we're back to the notion that the thing about the PC that made it revolutionary at that time was you could just keep pushing it. You know, the platforms were, the consoles were completely locked in.
Completely static at the time, and also, I mean, the gap between the PCs and the consoles was just bigger back then. It was just way bigger.
I think, and that's such an important point. I think the PS2 and what was it? The original Xbox, was it?
It was the original Xbox, I think, at that time.
That closed the gap, and it's never really opened up again as wide as it was. But you've got to. It's so important to remember the gap between the original PlayStation 1 and PC gaming by about 3 years into the PS1. Staggering.
It was absolutely staggering. I mean, at that time, like the high-end PCs were like light years beyond.
And I have to say as well, it was the
PlayStation.
maturity of the games for the most part too. I mean, you name check Resident Evil, and yes, that's obviously an important milestone. But titles that were that level of quality for the PlayStation were few and far between. So much of it was the kind of Crash Bandicoot kind. And I'm not disparaging that kind of gaming, but you know, like it just when you put that up against something like Half-Life, they're almost different species, aren't they? They're almost.
The video game culture of the consoles back then in particular still was very much sort of like incoming from the old 16-bit days, and of course in the 16-bit days they were marketed almost exclusively at children. Whereas the PC had a slightly different legacy, of course, because it's from the home computers, and the home computers, things like the Commodore Amiga, which was my first console, but my first computer ever, were always aimed at a slightly more adult audience. So you did get things like your odd horror game on the Commodore Amiga. You got your odd sort of very finite, limited first-person game. So the legacy was different, the audience was different. But I think what games like Half-Life did, because suddenly you had this situation as well with Half-Life where console gamers were jealous of the PC for the first time ever, probably, you know, barring Doom. You actually wanted, you know, you had the console audiences just clamoring for these games.
Well, it was just next level, wasn't it? I mean, it was just so far ahead of anything that the consoles were capable of producing. And it was such an amazing gaming. I mean, I still think it holds up. I mean, yeah, graphically it's dodgy by today's standards, of course, but
it still plays very well. I mean, there's still, there's the odd thing where there's been refinements and things have shifted around a bit to make them more fluid. But actually, Half-Life still plays pretty damn well. It's quite pared down. The controls are quite simple. There's nothing that complex about it.
No, and as we discussed, it's got the minimalist heads-up display is just still, I think, just genuinely beautiful as a piece of design.
It's the kind of thing that you wouldn't even... I mean, I certainly didn't notice that when I first played it. I was probably too young to notice that. But, you look at it now and it's like that... It is a stroke of absolute genius in a first-person game. Because if you look back to, say, Quake and to Doom, and the heads-up displays are really, intrusive.
Oh, God,
they take
so
up,
clunky.
significant bits of the screen. I
think my favourite thing with that, and I think it did start in Wolfenstein, was in Wolfenstein and Doom. You had your actual a representation of your face that got
the little
bloodier
face,
and bloodier as your health went down.
Yeah, I'd also reacted to stuff in the game. I mean, that's cute. I kind of like that. Like the Doom guy, his face, it will sort of go when it's shot and stuff like that, which is kind of fun. I kind of like that, but it is really obtrusive, isn't it? I mean, it's it takes away from the actual gaming screen.
It takes up the entire kind of bottom, whatever it is, inch or so of the screen. This bar of information. Then this was just, and again, the idea of situating it within the fiction, have it part of the suit, just genius.
It's genius, total genius, and it's such an easy thing to do.
Yeah, and then of course,
such a simple idea.
And then and then it's interesting to think about. So again, I was looking it up. So this is the first game that Valve produced.
Yeah, right. I wonder what people were thinking in ID and the other big video game, id Software. Yeah. They must have been looking at this and thinking, fuck.
No, absolutely.
I mean, maybe that's the reason why there wasn't another Doom game for donkey's years.
Oh, Christ. I mean, Duke Nukem, right? What was it? Would we have to wait 20 years in the end for that to come out?
Yeah, and we all know how that turned out.
Not exactly worth the wait, as it turned out.
No. Whereas Doom 3 is actually really bloody good, I have to say. And the more recent one, oh, wow. The people on my channel know about the more recent one because I've Let's Played it. It's a stunner. It's a stone cold stunner. But of course, borrows a lot from Half-Life.
Yeah. But I just thinking about the impact that Valve have had on gaming to this day. I mean, obviously, because Steam is Valve.
Well, yeah. I mean, for all of its cultural faults and whatnot, it's the gaming platform, isn't it? On the PC, it is the gaming platform. And without Steam, you don't have phenomena like The Binding of Isaac.
Exactly.
You really don't have the revolution in indie gaming that has occurred and hasn't stopped.
Yeah, right. It's the ongoing revolution, and it's I mean, obviously there are all kinds of flaws with it, but it's what it reminds me of, actually. It's the same thing with Amazon and writing. It's the same thing there, where it's Amazon is an absolute behemoth, and it behaves horrendously in any number of ways. The way it exploits labour laws, the way it exploits taps, loops, holes, horrific, inexcusable behaviour. It has also provided a platform for hundreds of thousands of writers who otherwise would not have a prayer of getting published.
No, it's actually sort of revolutionised publishing. Yeah, it's liberated publishing in that regard, for better and for worse, in the sense that, of course, you have voices that would never have been heard before. And it's not because they're not good writers. Right. It's not because the stories they tell aren't good. It's because what they produce, there isn't a big market for it. There isn't a financially beneficial market for it. There's also a lot of crap. There's an awful lot of crap. But there's diamonds.
Absolutely.
There are absolute diamonds out there. And the same is true on Steam.
Yeah.
I mean, these figures, like Ed McMillan, who created The Binding of Isaac, they came up on Steam. Undertale.
Yeah, and
I mean, bloody hell,
and even
these games that are so significant.
And, even the slightly shallower end of them, but Super Meat Boy and Spelunky, and
Spelunky, yeah, Shovel Knight,
Right.
this kind of stuff, you know? Brilliant, some absolutely brilliant independent horror games that have really sustained the horror genre in video gaming whilst it's going through its doldrums in the mainstream.
Well,
you know?
you did a piece on Amnesia, didn't you? Which was...
I did. I actually let's play all
Right.
of the Amnesia games, and they were phenomenal. I've got to say. I mean, they're old games
Right.
now, but I loved them. I've got to say, I just absolutely adored the experience of them. I mean, we may have to do another discussion on
Yeah,
those.
fair enough.
Because I could get into that. I could really get into that. But yes, you're absolutely right. Amnesia's a really good example of like an indie game made good.
But it's interesting to think, isn't it, about the legacy of Half-Life as not just being the influence it had,
No.
you know, in terms of this is what a video game can do, and those ripples are still going out, but also actually kind of ultimately structurally, you know, in sense of...
So actually sort of changing the entire topography of what video games are, how they're distributed.
And in its way,
you know, how
creating a
people
platform
consume
that's
them.
opened up the doors of opportunity to, you know, again, to hundreds of thousands of people who otherwise would never have been able to publish a video game.
Totally. I mean, it's an amazing legacy. I can't think of another video game quite like it, actually, where that is as epoch-making as Half-Life was, that did things so differently, that changed things so much. And it's hard to imagine what could do it again, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and I mean, even if something would need to, maybe once the doors have been blown open, that's it, you just let the people run through. I mean, it's funny, you were talking about Michael Jackson and the idea of, like, part of the reason we don't see stars of that scale anymore is because, arguably, is because we don't have the kind of, there isn't the kind of homogenous culture anymore.
Quite true. And also the nature of culture and the nature of media has changed so much. So, of course, you have to bear in mind, like, in the 1970s and 80s, when Jackson was, like, the be-all and end-all of everything, and he was everywhere, we just had less access to media. There was less media around. There were, like, less television channels. There were less means of consuming music.
Seriously, 4 TV channels, no internet, you know, half a dozen daily national newspapers. Radio,
absolutely.
4 stations. That was it. That was where the entire cultural output was forced through those tiny channels.
It's so weird to think.
It is really weird.
It's so strange to think. I mean, we are part of generations where I can only just remember a time when there was not computers, because I had my first computer when I was like 5, I think. So I can just about remember before there were computers. But it's amazing to think how revolutionary, how much that has changed. Just everything about culture, and Half-Life is a big part of that. It's a big part of that. It was so big at the time that I almost didn't like comprehend it.
No, I don't think I did.
You know.
But I think for me, what's just so interesting about it is you've got this cultural flashpoint, but then it's like, because it's built into the ethos of the release, because they provided the source code, because they provided the building tools, because they said, hey, go and play, take this forward and play. People did.
They did, and that you had a lot of sort of bedroom programmers having their experiences with modding Half-Life, and creating some bloody good games, I've got to say. And of course, because Valve had allowed for this, you used to get like these mods that people had made in their bedrooms that could be legally released. You had I remember at the time, the internet still wasn't quite as big as it is, nowhere near as big as it is now. It was still relatively rare. So a lot of these mods actually appeared on video game magazine covers.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
When they still used to have CDs.
Yeah. Well, and you got, the other game we haven't even mentioned, but of course it has a direct relationship to Half-Life, is Portal.
Of course,
which is a cultural phenomenon in its own right, frankly.
But was originally a tech demo. It was a free tech demo that came with... They never expected it to be anything, really. Right. but it became so popular. It became its own thing, and on many different levels. It wasn't just the technicalities, the physics, and all of that stuff. You had like the whole "the cake is a lie" thing. You know.
Well, again, that
you had GLaDOS. You had GLaDOS being wonderfully wampy.
But the thing about that was, again, it just took that ambient storytelling to the next level, didn't it? I mean, that's really what was good, and made it into a kind of Douglas Adams-esque comedy, right? Kind of Douglas Adams meets I don't know what, Kafka, I guess.
Yeah, with a definite Kafkaesque element to it. I mean, it's the sinister element of the storytelling that really got to me. You know, when you first start playing it and you didn't really know what was going on. You thought, oh well, it's a kind of fun tech demo thing where they're going to show us how to use the portals, and then you start getting the really sinister undertones coming through, and just sort of like, okay. And then you find that room where scrawled on the wall is "the cake is a lie," and it gets really sinister and horrible. Great. It is absolutely brilliant.
And the moment when it breaks down, right, you suddenly realise you're heading towards an incinerator, and then you're like, because that's the other thing I remember is vividly the feeling when you're suddenly behind the scenery, and that was just like,
So the game is breaking itself here. It's like breaking its own environments. It's so clever. Fantastic. It's so clever. But it spawned another sequel, which was vastly superior. You know, just beautiful, beautiful piece of work.
Absolutely, and again became an incredible success. It's just interesting to me. But I think that thing of like, I think what I'm so impressed by is how it opened the door for this stuff that follows. And maybe one of the prices you pay for blowing the doors off that wide is you don't get those flashpoints anymore, because it's more like a 1,000 points of light rather than one.
Maybe that's it. And of course, I mean, as we said at the very beginning, there is this constant internet and video gaming culture joke now. Where is Half-Life 3? When will Half-Life 3 happen? I'm not sure it will. I doubt it. And I'm not sure it even can. No. You know, if it did occur, how could it possibly fulfill the hype? How could it possibly live up to the legacy of Half-Life now? There's so much that's happened in video gaming since then.
You know, but I think they could just argue that Half-Life 3 is every video game that's come out since
kind of is, isn't it? Especially if you look at first-person games. Like the version of Doom that came out in 2016. Of course, there's a great influence from the original Doom games in it, but there's so much Half-Life in it too. There's so much Half-Life going on there.
Well, the use of lighting and sound and all of that kind of stuff is just kind of next level, isn't it? And they got back into the storytelling side of it there. I mean,
absolutely they did. And again, it's ambient. It's totally ambient.
The other game that I thought of that was clearly massively influenced by Half-Life, although it is a game that I think we could probably, again, this one probably does deserve its own episode at some point, but I hadn't realised the degree to which BioShock was influenced by Half-Life.
Oh my god! Well, BioShock, we need to do a video on, because BioShock is like, I suppose BioShock is kind of the next game in this sequence. It really is. BioShock. It wasn't as revolutionary in technical terms, but in storytelling terms, in terms of its philosophy, totally.
I think for me, what BioShock did was it picked up the ball. You know, it picked up the challenge from Half-Life, didn't it? It just said, okay, how far can we run with this? You know?
How clever can we make this? How beautiful? How come, and again, you get this incredible thing with the real environment, and in BioShock, it's even more overt. It's even, I mean, Rapture is a real environment. Yeah. You could live there. You could see how it worked. You could see where people lived, where they got their shopping, where they, you could see it working.
And the mechanics integration with the storytelling as well is seamless.
So bloody clever. It's so bloody clever. I actually, because I'd been out of video games for a while when BioShock came out. I was sort of in like a kind of cynical place with video games, but BioShock came out and I realised that it was the people behind System Shock that made it. Right. Irrational Games, and I was like, I've got to buy a console to play this. I've got to buy a console to play this, and I did, and it really lived up to expectation.
I mean, you've got to love a video game that is simultaneously one of the best first-person shooters you'll ever play, and also simultaneously demolishes the case for libertarianism through the medium of ambient storytelling in a first-person shooter. I mean, come on, like, what else do you need?
Absolutely. I mean, like the subtle jabs at things like Ayn Rand.
So
I mean,
good.
You know, one of the you know, Andrew Ryan. It's sort of like, yeah, that's subtle. That's subtle. Yeah, it's a stunner. I mean, it's a stone cold stunner. Yeah. We need to talk about that one.
Yeah, sounds good.
We need an episode to talk about that one. I mean, and did you play BioShock Infinite as well?
Infinite I haven't played yet.
Whoa! Oh,
yeah,
really?
Yeah, it's on the shelf.
Bloody hell! No. I mean, Infinite's very good. It's very bloody good. We'll leave that one then. Cool. We'll leave Infinite, but BioShock, the original BioShock, yeah, got to do that.
But again, yeah, it was one that I think because the gap between me playing the two games had been so long, I just had not appreciated how integrated the two games are. It's just such a clear family tree, isn't it? It's just such a clear familiar
totally
relation.
It is. Well, you go from Half-Life to System Shock 2, and System Shock 2 was made by Irrational Games to BioShock, and BioShock it could almost be like an updated mod for System Shock 2 because the mechanics are almost exactly the same. Almost exactly the same. It's that mixture of the RPG elements with the first person and the intermingled with a storytelling narrative driven game. It's very very clever.
Yeah, it's great stuff.
And System Shock 2 is one of my favorite games ever made, and it still is.
Yeah, it's an odd one that I've got a feeling that I've played a very small number of hours of it at some point, but I don't have a clear
Never
memory.
played it through. It was the first game I played on PC ever, all the way through. So it has a very special place in my heart, but it was also one of the first video games, and this is post Resident Evil, that made me shit myself. It is like, at the time, there wasn't anything like it. It was like a needle full of adrenaline to the heart. Terrifying. I mean, absolutely bloody terrifying. Wonderful.
I mean, the thing I remember about gaming from that era as well was that I remember because I've never slept particularly well. I've kind of got a better handle on it at this point in my life than I have at any time. But I still had the odd moment. But when I was a teenager, man, it was a nightmare. I mean, I basically
likewise.
I was on like 22-hour days basically. It was just like absurd. Like my cycle didn't end up sleeping for 14 hours. Like it just didn't cycle up with the rest of the world. But I vividly remember those early first-person shooters like Wolfenstein, and probably Half-Life 2, like just playing them through the night for hours and hours and hours stationary, probably smoking cigarettes back then as well, so just getting really dusty in the throat. And then I definitely remember dreaming about it.
Yeah, I remember that too. I have that very similar experience, because I was a total insomniac through my teenage years, right up until I was about like 25. I had like chronic insomnia. So it's exactly the same experience. It's like, and also getting so familiar with them, I vividly remember like Half-Life, games like Half-Life, like, shall I do a run of Half-Life?
Yeah.
I know every beat of this game, I know how to tackle every scene. Shall I do a run of Half-Life? And just squeezing them dry. Yeah. You know?
Well, and it's the thing about that. I always think it's the moments you remember. Like I remember running out of bullets just before I killed Hitler in the final level of Wolfenstein.
Taking that quote out of context.
And literally like running up to him and stabbing him to death to win the game. And just like, it was just a sheer fluke. I just ran out of bullets shooting at Hitler, and I'd killed Mecha Hitler, and it was just him with his chain gun, and I just literally ran out of bullets, and it was sheer desperation. I just ran at him with my knife and and he kind of exploded in this pool of like gibbous. I was like, well, that'll never happen again.
No, so that was like a triumphalist moment.
Oh, it's just magic. And then it cuts to like Hitler death cam, and it does it in slow-mo replay, and I was like, okay, That
absolute brilliance.
no one will ever believe me, but that actually did happen.
You kind of wish that you had the recording technology back then, don't you? Like Fraps or something, yeah?
But, you know, no, I'll take that one with me, but it will play in my internal memory banks until then. It was a fantastic... But, you know, and there are those, you know, they do that, don't they? They give you those moments.
They do. They really do, where you have these unique moments where things just go, something happens and they go phenomenally right or they go phenomenally wrong, or you have like these incredible moments of serendipity where everything just lines up and it works for you.
And I think, especially with Half-Life, the genius of Half-Life was it made the AI, the soldiers, good enough that everyone was almost guaranteed to get their own at some point.
Well, yeah, you always have some... I always remember like something funny or stupid happening with the game engine, or with like the way the enemies reacted, or something like that. There was lots of fun to be had in that regard. Absolutely. But man, all I can say about Half-Life, I mean, I don't even know how to conclude this, because nothing we've said here can really encapsulate the phenomena, because it was contextual, you know. It was the lightning in the bottle thing. It came along and it was a revolution. It was an apocalypse of video gaming. It changed everything.
But it was one of the best first-person shooters that's ever been designed, and it was also one of the, you know, like a really cracking horror story.
Yeah,
you know, a really superb sci-fi tinged horror story.
What else can you say? It's impossible, really, to describe if you weren't there, you know? It's impossible to describe. But if you do have some interest in video game history, you've got to go. You've either got to go play it from Grand Old Games, you know, it's up there, go get it. Or watch a playthrough of it, watch a Let's Play of it. I mean, if I could access it, I would Let's Play it. Yeah, I really would, you know? If I can get it working, bloody hell, I'll Let's Play it happily.
It's only a couple of quid on Steam, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and actually my laptop will probably run it these days, so, you know, actually I could play it. Actually, yeah. If I can get the recording software up, I'd Let's Play it.
Yeah, no, it's classic. And on the other version, of course, if you do want to spend a bit more money, because they did a fan shot-for-shot remake, didn't they?
They just sort of, they just remade it and gave it like slightly better graphics and just slightly better, like some of the voice acting's a little bit touched up and whatnot. They did, and it's actually pretty damn good.
So maybe, you know, if you look at the videos on YouTube and think, God, that looks a bit rough, maybe go for that version, because the story's still there. You'll still get the
Absolutely, and you know, it's an historical artifact. You know, it's an historical artifact as much as, say, Citizen Kane or 2001: A Space Odyssey is.
And like those, I think, in order to get the most out of it, you do have to constantly remind yourself as you're playing it, no one had ever seen anything. And that's the bit that you can't recreate, is that feeling of just of sheer, like, holy shit, what is happening here, you know?
Yeah, I cannot overemphasize that enough. The culture of it was something else.
Absolutely.
Something else. You literally couldn't move for Half-Life references when it came out.
And it just felt, I don't know, I mean, it's a weird thing, like, I just feel incredibly fortunate to have been the age I was at the time it came out.
Yes, totally. Because again, I mean, this is something, it's what we were talking about earlier, where we have sort of grown up with video games, and they've had their formative moments as we've had our formative moments. And there are certain touchstones, aren't there? There are things like the leap from 2D to 3D. There's the leap from cartridges to CDs. There's things like Final Fantasy VII, you know, which changed everything. Resident Evil, Tomb Raider, and Half-Life is one of those. It's where, like, and of course we would have been like sort of just around university age.
Yeah, that's right.
At that time, you know, I remember I was sort of like at the end of high school and just preparing to swan off to university.
Yeah, I think
when Half-Life came out,
I was just starting to seriously realise I was actually going to have to get a job. I think that's probably what was happening. Or possibly still in deep denial. Actually, it was probably like,
Well, I put that off for as long as possible. You know, so I'm going to stay in the education system as much as I can. Much good that did me. But yeah, and it's so strange to have that connection. It's so weird to have those moments and to have that sentiment to this media that is so unusual historically speaking.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is just like the thing about video games that's the opposite of movies is normally the sequel in a video game's better, right? Because the tech's better, it looks better, it plays better. They've ironed out the kinks with the physics and blah 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 blah. You know. And it does I think it makes it even tougher than cinema to go back and try and. I think video games is really hard to kind of experience in an archivist sense, you know.
Well, one of the big problems is that games that were revolutionary at the time actually become unplayable.
Yeah.
They become unplayable. I mean, if you go back and try to play GoldenEye on the N64 now, no. Just no. It hurts.
And yet...
It was revolutionary. Yeah. It was revolutionary. It changed everything. It was one of those revolutionary games. It hurts to play.
Well,
now.
I mean, the trouble is that with video games, once you do something right, everyone does it from then on. That's the problem.
Exactly.
Only better.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's more true in video games than it is in cinema and whatnot. It really is.
Well, you don't get accused of theft in the same way with video games. That's why.
No, you do not.
You don't have that issue. Otherwise, like, there'd be no first-person shooters because everyone would be like, well, there was Wolfenstein. We can't...
There was Wolfenstein, there was Doom, and then that was it. Yes, that's it. Finished. Yeah. Oh, man. I honestly, I don't know what else to say other than... It was a time.
Yeah, it was.
It was an event.
It was, and it was a privilege to be witness. It was a privilege to be part of. It really was.
It was. Well, thank you so much, Kit. Thank you so much. And I think on that, we'll sign out. Is there anything you would like to pimp?
Oh, blimey. I mean, I've got a couple of books coming out, but it's not going to be for a few months yet.
Not for a while
a couple of months.
But keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Keep an eye out. It's the summer, isn't it, that your new book is out?
Two. So I've got a novella coming out called The Finite, which where I will try my very, very best to break your heart. And then I've got a non-fiction book on the Ken Russell movie, Tommy.
Which, both of which very much looking forward to.
That will be out in July, I think. So we should be launching it Edgelit with a bit of luck. But yeah, other than that, it's the usual thing. Non-fiction, you want Ginger Nuts of Horror. Fiction, go to Amazon, look me up, and buy the paperbacks from your local independent bookshop and the ebooks from Amazon. And if you want to read everything I write before anybody else, you can bung me $1 a month on Patreon, and I will sort you out. So that's it, really.
Links down below, by the way, ladies and gents. For my part, you can find me around here on the Exaggerated Elegy channel doing lots of stuff. And all of my published works you can now purchase via links on the Strange Playgrounds website. So go forth and have a bit of a look at those if you would. That'd be very, very kind.
As our friend Steve Shaw would say, buy the books, buy all the books.
Buy all of the books, indeed. Please do, please do. Until next time, ladies and gents. Bye-bye.
Bye.